Boy, the news these days. Lately I've been feeling nostalgic for times gone by. You know, life was simpler in the olden days. Days gone by when you didn't worry that the constitutional system of the American government might implode. Yes, you know, the good old days of like the mid-2000s. Sure, my country was stuck in 2 wars, but in some way, things made sense. Well, not that much sense. But days like, let's say, the year 2005, before social media was big, before fake news. Actually, maybe there never were good old days. But this year 2005, the eminent Princeton University philosopher Harry Frankfurt wrote a short book. It was based on an earlier essay called well, I can't say the word because there's a family place and I'm a rabbi, so I'll call it this. The book is called On Droppings from Male Cattle. What Israelis call shtuyot. Well, I'll say this. It was called On BS, and that's as close as I'll get. What distinguishes lies from shtuyot, droppings of male cattle, is that a liar is trying to trick you. A liar wants others to believe that he or she is telling the truth. But according to Frankfurt, for the BSer, however, all these bets are off. He is neither on the side of the true nor on the side of the false. His eye is not on the facts at all. The eyes of the honest man and the liar are, except insofar as they may be pertinent to his interest in getting away with what he says. He does not care whether the things he says describe reality correctly. He just picks them up or makes them up to suit his purpose. Shtuyot is unavoidable whenever circumstances require someone to talk without knowing what he is talking about. Thus, the production of, I'll say it again, BS is stimulated whenever a person's obligations or opportunities to speak about some topic are more excessive than his knowledge of the facts that are relevant to the topic. This discrepancy is common in public life, where people are frequently impelled, whether by their own propensities or by the demands of others, to speak extensively about matters of which they are to some degree ignorant. Do we recognize this at all today? Are we thinking of someone who is too arrogant to say, I don't know, or I could be wrong, or too lazy to do any research, or too scared to show weakness? I'm not going to name names, but we all know that we're living in an age of, let's say, something more than just lying. An age of what Stephen Colbert called, back in the mid-2000s, truthiness. What the Oxford Dictionary had as their top word last year, post-truth. Or what one advisor to the American president calls alternative facts. So today, I want to talk about truth. Not necessarily truth with a capital T. I don't want to get too philosophical, too metaphysical, but I want to talk about telling the truth and what Judaism stresses with this midah, this character trait of emet. It says it all over our prayer book, emet, emet, aleph, mem, taf. The first letter, the middle letter, and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's as if truth is all-encompassing. Truth, as our tradition says, is the signature of God. Now, I don't think most of us reach this level of post-truth or what our book that I was mentioning before talked about, but we all lie sometimes. You know, I've been in a situation, let's say at a party where everybody's talking about a classic movie and I hadn't seen it, so I didn't want to feel like I was left out. So of course, I said I saw it. Not so bad. Or of course, Maybe many of us, but I know I have. I've lied to my kids many times about many things. Is it to protect them? Well, maybe it's usually because I don't want to take the time to explain something to them. So I lie because of laziness. The contemporary teacher Ellen Marinis writes about a student of his, a student who tells that she tells a story out of fear of being taken to task, to be seen in a negative light. Now, once she had to miss a board meeting. Now, I see many board members around here, and we probably feel this pang of guilt when we have to meet a board meeting. So she had to miss a board meeting because, though, it conflicted with her husband's 70th birthday. She said, I found myself preparing all kinds of stories that would, quote, protect me from these fears, she said. Just as the story reveals, peel back the behavior and you're almost sure to discover that the source of a lie is a fear of one thing or other. We lie because we fear facing someone else's disappointment, or having disappointment ourselves, or fear of shame or loss, or any number of other possibilities. It was not because of her inner awareness, but rather her commitment to tell the truth, that the student hosting her husband's 70th birthday party eventually decided not to lie about the situation. What happened next was a revelation. She said, instead of lightning coming down from heaven, I got congratulations for my husband's big birthday and a few "your family comes first" remarks. It felt like a bit of my soul was being saved. So if we make it a practice of telling the truth, even when telling a seemingly harmless white lie is easy, then we can look inward. We can learn a lot about truth, about our fears and our other motivations, about our behavior. The 19th century writer Menachem Mendel Levin writes, lying is the most despicable spiritual illness. At first, it stems from the pursuit of permitted pleasure, money, prestige, or the esteem of men. It then progresses towards the pursuit of prohibited pleasures. At the end, it becomes an acquired inclination of its own, lying for the sake of lying. So we need to make a practice paying attention when we lie for no reason. There's a classic rabbinic story about Rav Safra. And Rabbi Louis Jacobs telling Rav Safra was approached to sell something he had and was offered a price which suited him. But he was unable at the time to signify his consent because he was reciting his prayers and was unable to interrupt them. So someone comes along and says, I'm going to pay this price for whatever he's selling. And Rav Safra couldn't say okay because he was doing something else. He was praying here. The prospective buyer, under the impression that the rabbi had rejected his bid with his silence, kept on increasing the price, but the rabbi insisted on selling for the original price to which he had consented in his heart. Naturally, this kind of exemplary conduct was not intended for all. Otherwise, it would not have been recorded for a saintly man like Rav Safra. But the stern injunctions throughout Jewish literature against cheating and dishonesty in business affairs and in other areas of life are directed towards every Jew, as when the prophet says of his people, they have taught their tongue to speak lies, they weary themselves to commit iniquity. Now, practicing, even forcing ourselves to tell the truth, is not the same thing as always speaking our mind, especially when it might be hurtful to others. We all know people who are overly honest and say what actually pops into their heads, and sometimes we think, oh, well, they're truth tellers. They're being honest and they're being refreshing. But I think Jewish thought has a different take. Speech between individuals should not be hurtful. Speech should not be hurtful even when the person you're talking about is not near you. The famous classic example is in the Talmud. So, sorry, it's very gendered, but it's the beautiful bride. Our ancient sage Hillel states that all brides should be praised as beautiful and gracious. His intellectual sparring partner Shammai asks, what if a bride limps or is blind? Should one praise her as being beautiful and gracious? Has not the Torah told us, keep your distance from falsehood? Hillel tells us that we should not be primarily concerned with how our words correspond in an instance like this to verifiable reality, but rather for the impact our statement will have on another person. So I have a funny example. I love the radio show This American Life. It's an American show filled with stories and journalism, but often very quirky. And the host, Ira Glass, was interviewing a man named Michael Levitin, a guy who was brought up in a community, and especially in his family, that they were always supposed to tell what was on their mind. They said, this is telling the truth. Here's part of the transcript. Michael Levitin said, I just have a very unusual family. They valued honesty to an extreme extent. And then the host of the show, Ira Glass, Michael is in his 30s, and he was raised by parents who encouraged him and his siblings to tell everything, the whole truth, all the time, believing that it hurts relationships when we avoid awkward truths, that we all should just man up and talk things through. We should work things out. And being honest also means being true to who you are, right? Which obviously anybody wants for their kids. But hearing how far his family went with this, it makes you really understand how incredibly strange your daily life would be if you were to never withhold the truth. Like, for a long time, Michael believed that if somebody asked him a question, like any question at all, he had to answer it honestly. So Michael says, this is funny because in job interviews, people would ask me what my biggest flaw was. And I would go into a long rant about all my flaws and all the negative things anyone's ever said about me. And people would look at me. I got used to this expression of horror. And sometimes it was kind of comic. People would laugh like, wow, you thought you actually had to answer that? So now Michael continues and he talks about dating. Okay, one time I went on a date when I was in college. And I went on this date, and I spent the whole date explaining why she would want to be with me, what was great about me, and also why other people didn't want to be with me. I'm saying all the bad things that ever happened to me, why I was rejected by the world. Now this was just being honest. I was just telling her all the information necessary in my mind to decide whether to be with me. I thought it was my responsibility as a person on a date to explain everything they were dealing with from the first moment of the date so that they would make an informed decision about how to move forward. Now, elsewhere in the radio show, he talks about also on a date how he didn't like what the woman was wearing, so he just said it. It didn't go well. Now, it's a funny example about sometimes we need to hold back our words. But I learned a real truth related to this from a politician. Really, a politician. I had the opportunity not long ago to meet a prominent Canadian Muslim politician in an intimate setting in someone's home. We were talking about many social issues, and someone brought up the claim that free speech was being restricted because of, quote, political correctness. The politician said something like this: if by political correctness you mean not being allowed to say offensive things because you feel that you'll be ostracized, actually, that's a good thing. He explained that we should be allowed to criticize things in society with well-reasoned arguments and talk about things that are difficult. That is speaking truth. And for him, this politician, this might mean talking openly about Muslim integration into society. But here was the politician's real truth. He said, I paraphrase, if the older generation feels something distasteful or hateful, if they feel this, and they don't say it because of fear of political correctness, that is great, because the next generation will not even feel it if they don't hear it. What is he saying? Words matter. It might be what someone thinks is their truth inside of them, that Muslims are terrorists, or it might be that Jews are greedy, or what have you. But saying that is not speaking the truth, besides the fact that it's verifiably wrong as a collective. Our words should not be used to hurt or ostracize. Saying that Mexican immigrants to the U.S., documented or not, are rapists, drug dealers, and bad hombres has nothing to do with political correctness or truth. We're talking about crowd sizes or whatever. So we have to practice honesty in speech, but not saying things that are hurtful. But in Jewish law, there are times when it is permissible to say some white lies. Rabbi Louis Jacobs teaches, when the intention is to promote peace and harmony, the Talmud observes that a scholar will never tell a lie, or can not say the whole truth if it's about peace or harmony. And then a scholar will never tell a lie except in 3 instances. In Hebrew it says there, masechet, about a tractate, also puria, which I'll define in a minute, and then about hospitality. The commentators explain masechet, tractate, means that a modest scholar is allowed to declare that he is unfamiliar with a tractate of the Mishnah in order not to parade his learning. Now, this word puria, Rashi translates as bed, and understands it to mean that if a scholar is asked intimate questions regarding his marital life, he need not answer truthfully. The descendants of Rashi, the Tosafot, find it hard to believe that such questions would be addressed to the scholar or anyone else, and they understand puria to be connected with the festival of Purim. If the scholar is asked whether he was drunk on Purim, he is allowed to tell a lie about it. And finally, hospitality is understood to mean that a man who has been treated generously by his host may decide not to tell the truth about his reception if he fears that as a result, the host will be embarrassed by unwelcome guests. Those are the only times you can lie. To practice humility, to protect the modesty of a loved one, maybe to protect someone's financial situation if too many guests will really put him out. That's it. Ellen Marinis tells a story about the 19th century Rabbi Israel Salanter that reveals the inner process that a master of truth goes through in executing the judgment of truth that is our guideline and goal. Rabbi Salanter gave a regular Talmudic discourse. One day, a student asked a very sharp question that seemed to undermine the entire argument Rabbi Salanter was making. He paused for a moment, then he conceded the point and stepped down from the dais. Later, he told his students about what he had thought in the moment before he stepped down. In that instant, at least 5 acceptable answers came into his mind to refute the question. Even though he could see that they were not ultimately true, he knew it was unlikely that anyone in the audience would see through them as he could. He was tempted to try them, even for positive reasons. His admission of failure might cause the Torah he represented to lose honor, and he himself might lose face, and that might negatively impact his ability to affect people positively. After these thoughts, he chastised himself. Admit the truth, and he stepped down. In the end, he explained, it was in serving the needs of his soul and the souls of others that he had to be truthful. Though difficult, this is the guideline we too must follow. Truth is an exercise, a judgment, and a test. The goal is to live truth according to the guidance of your discerning heart. For the sake of your soul, you are as well, the sake of your soul, the soul that you are, as well as the souls of others. So let's go back to the beginning. When our leaders keep telling the same lies, the same droppings of male cattle, they're probably hurting their souls, but they're definitely hurting ours. The more we hear something, the more we are resigned to it, or the more we doubt what we know to be true. That's the point. If they keep saying the same thing, it gets stuck in our head. The writer Yael Milamid writes, in a recent study by the psychologist Don Ariely, researchers took brain scans during the course of an experiment in which people lied repeatedly, and they found that the brain reacts less severely to lies over time. This is not good for democracy. This is not good for relationships. This is a desecration of the signature of God. The more we tell the truth, not offensive words, but we tell the truth with modesty and humility, the more our relationships will flourish and hopefully society. As the medieval poet Shmuel HaNagid writes, delay your speech if you want your words to be straight and free of deceit, as a master archer is slow to take aim when splitting a grain of wheat. O God of truth, whose signature is truth, we know that we cannot know the all of truth, but help us this year to know in our hearts the ways of truth, and to speak truthfully, and to act responsibly. Shana Tova.